Strange Shadows, a Clark Ashton Smith podcast. The statuette was not more than 12 inches in height and represented a female figure that somehow reminded me of the Medicean Venus, despite many differences in feature and proportion. It was wrought of a black wood, almost as heavy as marble, and the unknown artist has certainly made the most of his material to suggest a type of beauty well-nigh classic in its perfection of line. It stood on a pedestal formed in imitation of a half moon, with the cloven side of the hemisphere constituting the base. The workmanship was quite amazing, and would not have been unworthy of the more archaic and primitive periods of Roman art.
Greetings friends, and welcome to Season 1, Episode 7 of Strange Shadows. The voice you just heard was Shelley de Cruz, reading the opening paragraph of the story we're covering today. I'm one of your hosts, Rob Poyton.
And I'm the other one, Tim Mendes. Before we begin today, I'd just like to call back to the last episode. At one point, we were discussing an exchange between August Derleth and Clark Ashton Smith regarding how much they write, their sort of average word counts in a day.
Oh, yeah.
I managed to dig the letters out. It took me bloody ages to find them, to find the right one. But Clark Ashton Smith replies to a letter which is lost, unfortunately. But he replies to a letter saying, 6,000 words in one day certainly argues for facility. I guess 3,000 is the most I've ever done. Usually I consider 1,000 or 1,500 a good day's work. And then August Derleth replies in a letter following on from that saying, I wish I could do 6,000 every day. The only things I've been able to do since then are the 2,000 words movement in minor and 1,000 of the introduction to an evening in spring. Once I did 11,000 words in one day.
Wow.
That's good going, isn't it?
That is extremely good going. If you could do that every day, it'd be a book a week virtually, wouldn't it? That.
Yeah.
Because I think the thing is that people sometimes don't understand, and funnily enough, there was a conversation going on today on the radio without getting into politics, but a certain female politician at the moment said British workers are lazy and was talking about output. That. Yeah, and someone made this point about how do you measure that sort of thing? It's kind of, I guess, if you're on a sort of production line or that kind of...
Yeah, something with a quota.
Yeah, a lady actually phoned in and said she was a writer. And she said, well, look, I might sit there and write for an hour, then I have to get up and take the dog for a walk or something because, my brain has to process what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So we could all, in theory, write 10,000 words a day, but it would be crap. Right?
Well, this is it, isn't it? It's like I saw a meme, funny enough, the other day, which summed it up as well. And it was basically what normal people don't realise is that sitting staring at a page on your computer screen for 6 hours is still considered writing. It is, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, I find myself doing that a lot, just sitting there, just looking at it going, that's not right.
Yeah.
Why isn't that right?
Yeah. No, totally. And you want to tweak things and then read it back or read it out loud sometimes. That's all part of the process. But, and I find I do things like I go for a bike ride and I get some ideas pop into my head. It's probably quite a common thing. You need time away from that.
Yeah, I'd go walking.
Yeah.
I'd just go sort of aimlessly wandering around the streets. And that's how I do it. Yeah.
So if you're ever in Brighton, folks, and you see a figure aimlessly wandering, now you know who it is. Don't interrupt him, he's thinking.
Yeah, this is it. It's an important part of my creative process.
And speaking of that, we're covering the Venus of Azombeii today.
Indeed.
We're we're getting into the longer stories now, aren't we?
Yeah.
We've had a couple of episodes with short stories.
Yeah. Yeah, this is 11,000, I think Smith said in one of his letters.
Right.
So, yeah.
And I think by now he was really getting into his stride. And we're in that sort of time period where he was putting out sort of 3 stories a month.
Yeah.
Which is pretty good going.
It is, isn't it? It is. It's terrifying when you look at the Derleth saying that he does so much more. I mean, how much was he banging out?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's mind-boggling, really.
Although, again, as we have said before, 4,000 of those words were the shopping list.
Yeah, this is true. This is very true.
We shouldn't be so hard on Mr. Derleth. We owe him a lot.
Oh, yeah, and I am actually a fan of a lot of his stuff as well. It's just, there is... It's like I said when we covered him in the It's With Book Club podcast, I'd love to be able just to go back and re-edit some of his stuff and just crop those big long passages where he lists every mythos tome, every mythos deity, everything Lovecraft has ever mentioned.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Okay, so The Venus of Azombeii, what's the publication history on this one?
Right, this one was completed on November the 4th in 1929 and was accepted by Farnsworth Wright for almost immediately for publication in the June to July 1931 issue of Weird Tales. He was paid the princely sum of $75.
Oh, that's good.
Which is
we're going up in the world.
Yeah,
but a couple of $20, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The previous stories,
which is really good going for the time. I mean, that's a hell of a lot of money for the time.
Yeah.
So it's another one of those that Smith was a bit sort of iffy on. He didn't seem to really like it as much as a lot of his other stuff for some reason. But
it gets a very brief mention in the correspondence between him and Lovecraft.
Does it?
It basically says, Wright accepted The Venus of Azombeii, and Lovecraft says in his reply, "Oh, congratulations," and that's pretty much it.
Right.
There's much more talk about Satambrazeros, which we'll be covering next time. So I think again, it's not one of Smith's strongest or best stories, but as always, there's a lot of interesting stuff in there.
Oh yeah.
There's a little bit of problematic stuff as well in there, perhaps, which we'll be talking about as we go through.
Yeah.
But as always, there's some lovely language.
Oh hell yeah, yeah. In the a reply to August Derleth, because Derleth would rate each issue of Weird Tales. He would rate all the stories and put them in a top 10.
Right.
And he'd put this as number 3.
All right.
And Smith says, "Yeah, I agree with you also in giving The Venus of the Zombie 3rd place in the current Weird Tales. The tale is an odd mixture of poetry and melodrama and may, I'm not sure, prove quite popular with Wright's clientele. It was one of my earliest and has had to wait about 18 months for publication, so I was wrong about saying almost immediately."
Well, that is in Wright terms, that is immediately, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I think the interesting thing with this as well is there's no real supernatural element, is there?
Yeah, which is something that Ramsey Campbell touches on in the introduction to the volume that we're using. Despite a lack of any real weirdness, The Venus of a Zombie found favour with Farnsworth Wright. It's an erotic tribute to the incarnation of a fancied Africa, narrated with some, one might say, a discreet leer and a turgid pulse.
Oh, turgid pulse. Nice.
Yeah.
Nicely said, Mr. Campbell. Yes, totally agree with that. Yeah,
same.
So, shall we start with our favourite words? Because I think we've got a 2 or 3 each here, haven't we? And for a change, we've chosen different ones as well, I think.
Yeah, we have. I think. Yeah, that's good.
So, shall I? I'm going to open with tetanic then. Tetanic agony, which I never heard of before, but relates to tetanus and the muscle spasms that someone suffering from tetanus gets.
And a lockjaw and all that.
Yeah. So very vivid sort of word and very fitting given the setting of the story. So that was my first one. Nice.
Yeah, my first one would be baobabs. For a start, it sounds rude, but I've never known the name. It's those really, really fat trunk trees you get in Africa with the little like spindly limbs coming out the top of them.
Right.
Yeah, it's one of those, and I've never known the name of them, and now I do. So, cheers, Mr. Smith.
And I think mine was from the same sentence. Mine was pandaus, which, again, going on that botanical theme, are palm-like trees found in the tropics. So, again, I'd never heard of that.
No.
I did read somewhere that when the wind blows a certain way, these trees sway in a very sort of rhythmic dancing fashion.
Nice.
That the locals call Pandau Ballet, but I'm not too sure if that's strictly
gold. Totally
sorry, I couldn't resist that. And my final word, which I did know and had seen quite a few times before, vituperations, which is just a lovely word.
Nice.
Abusive language, basically. Yeah. What a lovely word for something so horrible.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like I've always liked the term spitting oaths because for giving them a round of fox, it's yeah. I think my final one is sedulous.
Oh, that's nice.
Which is a synonym for meticulous, which I'd never encountered. Well, I may have encountered it, but never. It's never.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Never really paid any attention to it, but yeah. That's a good one, sedulous.
So as again, Mr. Smith gives us some familiar words, but also some totally new words as well.
Yep.
I don't think there's been a story that I haven't had to look at least one word up.
No,
so
no. I think so far, no. I think you're right. I think maybe one of the prose poems early on.
Yeah.
But there was still some great phrasing in it. I seem to remember a phrase. Oh, no, that was it. It was Phantoms of the Fire.
Right. So, as we heard, this story revolves around a statuette about 12 inches of height that represents a female figure that reminds our protagonist of the Medician Venus. So, I'm sure this figure will be familiar to everyone, the Venus de Medici. This is a 5-foot-tall marble statue of Aphrodite that was believed to have been sculpted in the 1st century BC in Athens, probably from a bronze sculpture originally. It was sent to Florence in 1677, and it's the figure of the Venus with one hand across the chest and the other hand held lower down.
Yeah.
Instantly recognisable. And there's been some copies and other versions of it as well, like Venus de Milo.
Didn't Monty Python use it in they used it in one of their animations, didn't they? Standing on an oyster shell.
Oh, I think you're right. Yes. Because this is Aphrodite, of course, who came from the waves in Cyprus, I believe. She washed up in Cyprus on the big shell. Afro actually means sea foam, so she was from the sea foam. One interesting thing I found here, because Venus pops up a fair bit in Smith. I think we've already had at least 2 or 3 mentions of Venus in various forms already.
Yep.
And of course, there's the disinterment of Venus, which we'll be covering later on.
Yes.
Where the statue is dug up and sends all the monks into a bit of a frenzy. And I thought that was interesting because one reason it was sent to Florence was because Pope Innocent XI said that this statue stimulated lewd behaviour. Yeah. So he wanted it out the way, which ties in directly with the plot of Disinterment of Venus. So there's a nice little connection there.
Oh, no. Suspicious movements under the monkly habits.
Yeah, imagine all standing around the statue, can't
you? Yeah,
you?
exactly.
Or perhaps not.
Let's not think about that.
So, although it reminds the protagonist of the Venus de Medici, when he studies it further, he finds there are quite a few differences, and that the resemblance is largely in the pose and the curves of the hips and the shoulders. And then we get this description of the face, which is fuller, with a smile of enigmatic voluptuousness about the heavy lips, and a sensuous droop to the deep eyelids, which were like the petals of some exotic flower, when they fold beneath a sultry velvet evening.
Oh, man. He's off.
And we learn that this figure was brought by his friend Marsden from Africa, and it stands on his library table. So the setting for the story is Africa.
Yep.
And I think at this time we're looking, well, sort of late 20s, early 30s. We're very much in the territory of sort of Tarzan, Edgar Rice Burroughs, Rider Haggard, and even to some extent, I thought Robert E. Howard's Solomon Kane stories that are set in Africa. Yeah,
one thing that came instantly to my mind was William Seabrook's The Magic Island, which was 1929, which was the inspiration for the film The Serpent and the Rainbow, the Wes Craven movie.
Oh, right. Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, which it's obviously set in Haiti and is all about like voodoo and all that kind of business. And Seabrook actually, later on in his life, actually went to Africa and stayed with alleged cannibal tribes.
Ah, wow.
Which, yeah, it's one of those where it's like, how much truth is in it?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And I think we're in that sort of idea of Africa is the sort of untamed, mysterious continent.
Yeah.
There's that sort of exoticism going on. Yeah, we very much get this idea about Africa being a repository of lust and sorcery and corruption. It kind of reminded me a bit like the sort of Sax Roma thing with Fu Manchu, and about how China had this same thing. It's exotic, but at the same time it's evil and it's decadent.
Yeah.
So there's that Western imperialism, or I guess colonial attitude coming out a lot.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I was like, I picture this Marsden chappie when he's on his first excursion. I do picture him in a pith helmet. You know, it's got that sort of, it's almost like a hangover of the Victorian attitude.
Yeah.
You know, to me, yeah.
And there is an element of that in the story as we go through the white man being accepted by the local tribe and elevated to this position. Though in some sense there is at least a plot reasoning for this, which we'll get into as we go on.
Yes.
So yes, Marsden has this African figurine, but Marsden is not a well man at all.
That's putting it mildly. Yeah. Yeah. His skin had become corpse-like in its pallor. His hair was heavily sprinkled with grey, and his eyes had darkened in an unaccountable manner, as if they had somehow absorbed the mysteriously profound and sinister blue of tropic nights. Nice.
And he has this air of being followed. When he goes into a room, he's always looking over his shoulder and looking around as though there's something haunting him or something dogging him in some way. Yeah,
I loved that. I thought that was a lovely little touch. It's almost like Churchill's Black Dog, isn't it? It's
yes, yeah. And we get, or the protagonist gets the idea that the statue is somehow connected to this.
Mm-hmm.
And we find out that Marsden lives alone with one servant in a large house on Russian Hill in San Francisco, which he inherited together with a considerable fortune from his parents. So this guy is your typical dilettante, if you like, your Call of Cthulhu scenario dilettante investigator, explorer, etc., etc.
And again, the Victorian, because it was always the rakish son, wasn't it, who went off to explore the dark continent, you know.
Yes.
Whereas the good son would follow on the family trade. It was always the rotter, the scoundrel, you know.
And we get the San Francisco setting again, which we've had a couple of times already. This time we're in Russian Hill, which is next door to Nob Hill, which always gets a laugh. Because, you know, we're basically school kids when it comes to that sort of humour.
Yeah.
Quite a high-end neighbourhood, this place. Famous residents of Russian Hill include Jack Kerouac and Neil Cassidy. And a lot of the main chase scene in Bullet with Steve McQueen was filmed on Russian Hill. So if you watch that film, that's Russian Hill.
Was it really? Awesome. I never knew that. All right.
Yeah, that's due for a rewatch. That was the first big sort of car chase, wasn't it, in a film, I think, or the first modern car chase.
The first one wasn't done where people sitting in a car rocking it from side to side as like a real footage reel went on the back of it. Yeah.
So his friend has come to see Marsden again, and he's really gone downhill.
Yes.
And he talks about this idea of she is dying as well. We have the doctor come. The doctor's mystified. The doctor's baffled. And, this is where we start getting this feeling about there are dreadful things in Africa, malignant lust and corruption and poison and sorcery, things that are deadlier than death itself.
Nice.
At least deadlier than death in any form that we know. Don't ever go there.
I think somebody once said that to me about Liverpool. Sorry, it's a Mancunian joke.
And we get with this death, which sort of plays out over the next couple of pages. It's by no means a peaceful death. It's protracted.
No.
The guy is in agony. We get the tetanic agonies described, the spasms he's having. But even more than that, we get this curious devolution. In fact, the word devolve even comes up again.
Yeah.
And this is something we see a lot. In fact, we were talking about it just recently in the Innsmouth Book Club with Thomas Lagotti's The Last Feast of Harlequin, which, spoiler alert, ends in people devolving into these horrible worm-like shapes.
Yes,
It seems to be a recurring theme across weird fiction, this devolution.
it is. Yeah, very much so. Yeah, you can see it in pretty much a lot of it. I mean, especially in the works of like Machen and Lovecraft.
Yeah.
Really. Yeah. You have these like places like Dunwich. It's sort of devolved into a sort of, decadent society kind of thing. And I guess Smith does it a lot in his stuff as well, especially the like the Hyperborea and Averoigne stuff, because these are civilizations that were once grand and mighty and have now fallen by the wayside, kind of thing.
I think in the Abominations of Yondo we had something of that as well. From what I remember, there was
Yes.
even quite a pointed reference to that. And this idea that moral decay is followed by an actual physical decline and decay as well.
Yeah.
So poor old Marsden eventually dies after much suffering, but is left behind his journal for his friend Holly to read. So this is where we get into the main story and find out what has caused this terrible affliction.
Yeah, I just love the way it starts. I, Julius Marsden, have experienced all my life the ineffable nostalgia of the far off and the unknown. Nice.
And is very drawn to Africa. Even the word Africa conjures up for him as if by some necromantic spell. So we've got to have a mention of necromancy.
Yeah.
In every Smith story.
Yeah.
The very quintessence of all mystery, of all romance, and no woman's name could have been dearer to me or more eloquent of delight and allure than the name of this obscure continent. It's interesting because it's not obscure to the people who live there, is it? You know what I mean?
No. Yeah.
It's this exoticism again, I guess.
Again, it's that sort of colonial thing, isn't it? It's like whenever you read any memoirs of these Victorian explorer chaps, it's always this romantic and mysterious and, obscure and strange to me sort of thing. And I like the fact that they always sort of call it uncharted territory, even though there's people who live there,
It reminds me of an Eddie Izzard sketch he did years ago where he talked about the British would sort of rock up somewhere and plant a flag, and say, this belongs to England now, and the people would come out and go, hello?
Yeah.
Who are you? This is ours. Have you got a flag? Well, no. Well, we've got a flag.
Yeah.
So
This is it, isn't it? And this is precisely what happened. It's like, it wasn't just us. The French were doing it as well.
Oh, yeah.
Look at the Caribbean. It was like, we got here first. Here's our flag.
Yeah.
When we got here first, then there's all these like guys who live there just going, what are these idiots doing?
Yes. Yeah. And very infamously, the Belgians in the Congo as well.
Yes,
which
of
was
course.
just genocidal, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
So he makes his way to Africa. He's got a 22-month sojourn ahead. Morocco, Tunis, Egypt, Zanzibar, Senegal, Dahomey, and he ends up in Nigeria. And it's in Nigeria that things start going wrong.
Yep.
Is heading for the Atlantica Mountains, which they run between the border of Nigeria and Cameroon. Now, there are a couple of interesting things I found out here. Given the way the story works out, and I don't know if Smith would have known this or not. Well, there's one part of this that he couldn't have known. So the Atlantica Mountains, the name Atlantica means Allah hasn't yet arrived. And what that pointed to was the people who lived in that region rejected Islam.
Yes.
Because a lot of the local tribes became Islamic at that time. They stuck to their old pagan religion, which plays into this story.
Indeed, yeah.
We get that very mention. But then the Coma people, we're talking sort of mid-19th century here, took refuge in the Atlantica Mountains from colonialism. Basically, they didn't want to pay the colonial tax. They didn't want to put up with all that crap.
Makes sense, yeah.
So they went up into the mountains and hid there. And there they stayed unnoticed until 1980.
Oh, right. That's them guys. I remember reading about that. Yeah.
Right. So they were there tucked away in these mountains for 100 years, a kind of pagan, in inverted commas, tribe.
Yeah.
Unknown, untouched, which ties in exactly with this story. So whether
it does,
whether Smith was aware of this, I don't know. We can't tell, I guess.
Yeah. I've only just thought of this because we were talking about parallels in this story. There's a lot of parallels in this to Carry On Up the Jungle. There is. with the tribe, the lovey-dovey's tribe. Yeah. Yeah. Don't know what just popped in my head.
Well, that's a finer representation of British colonialism as anything, isn't it? Really,
exactly.
The absurdity of it and everything else. So.
Yeah. Sir Bill Boozy. Yeah.
So as he's travelling here, we get the. I guess that's quite the common trope, isn't it? The bearers and the local people are saying, "Well, we're in the districts of Azombeii now, and the people here are bad. They're cannibals. They're pagans. We don't really want to be here." And at first he brushes this off as, they're just trying to sort of screw a bit more money out of me, which he agrees to. He's going to triple their wages. But then he wakes up in the morning and they've all gone. So obviously it wasn't a money thing. They were genuine.
Yeah, that reminded me of Robert Bloch's Faceless God.
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah, exactly. Same thing, wasn't it? Exactly the same.
Yeah.
And I think they did the same in this. They left in some stuff, right? They left him some supplies and food and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
They weren't being total bastards.
Just like, no, mate, we're off. Yeah.
And then we get our first encounter with the inhabitants of Azombeii when the description here is two Negro women attired in little more than the lightning amber air of morn stood close beside me. They've just sort of emerged out of the forest and are just standing there looking at him.
I love his next breath here. Both were fairly tall and well proportioned. That's a delicate way of putting it.
It is. This is with Smith getting into his stride now.
Isn't it just? Yeah.
And it continues. Her skin was a lustrous velvet black with subtle gleams of rapid running bronze. But all her features and proportions, by some astounding anomaly, were those of an antique Venus. So we get, again, we start getting into little tinges of perhaps, I don't know if we call it racism. I guess we'll discuss that at the end in a little bit more detail.
Yeah.
But she's black in appearance, but our features, she might have been a woman of Rome or Pompeii, sculptured in black marble. So she has this, what he calls a classical beauty.
Yeah.
Whereas the second woman was of a more negroid type, though personable enough in her way. We get that. Yes. It's a little bit of a shame.
Yes. It's a shame. It is a shame because a lot of the rest of it is actually handled quite well, I think, for the time. I think it's, it's quite progressive in a way for its time. But yeah, there is the odd bit that just makes you cringe when you read it. Yeah.
So the woman starts speaking to him, the woman who he calls the leader. He figures that the other woman is a servant, and he can't make out anything except for this word Arumani, which is repeated several times. And he doesn't understand the speech. It doesn't really sound like any local speech or dialect he knows, but there's a vague sense of familiarity with some of it. He follows them to their village, which is described as a cultivated fields and a large village of clay huts. And they say Azombeii, so we're in Azombeii. And I think later on he says there's about 3,000 people live here, which is, that sounds like that's a big village, by my reckoning.
Yeah.
I think my local village here, we've got about 200 people or something. So that's a lot of people for a village. And a lot of the locals crowd around him and are being very friendly and inquisitive. And he notices that his Venus-like companion gets a lot of reverence from them. She's obviously someone very important in the village.
This is where he meets an old man with a bald head and a straggling fringe of grey beard, who can basically speak in broken English, which I like this bit here. He, it seemed, had travelled as far afield as Nigeria during his youth, which accounted for his linguistic accomplishments. So it was fortuitous, really.
Yeah, because otherwise none of us will know what's going on, is it? This is our exposition, man. And it's quite often an old geezer, isn't it? Whatever the setting, there's always an old... I've used it myself. I mean, I can't complain.
Yeah, I think I have as well, actually. Yeah, it's always an old geezer or a twisted old crone, isn't it? It's one or the other.
It's your Zadok Allen, isn't it?
It is your Zadok Allen. That's precisely what it is.
And we learn that the woman is called Mibiloe, and she is a sort of avatar of Wanos, which is the statuette, which we're getting this sense of Venus. It sounds quite similar. So Nagaza, our old our old friend, basically gives us the history and the background of the tribe.
Yeah.
According to their traditions, the worship of one Eos amongst them was almost as old as the world itself, and had been introduced ages and ages ago by white strangers from the north who called themselves Arumani.
Yeah.
So we can kind of see where this is going. Venus, Arumani, Roman. There's going to be no surprises when that's revealed.
Yeah, I do like the fact that it is sort of explained, though, because so many times in this sort of story, it's not.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah.
And we learn that Mibaloe, who's a girl of 18, has recently been elected to be the avatar or embodiment of the goddess because she's the most beautiful maiden of the district, chosen by the priests and priestesses for this role.
Mm-hmm.
And that also comes with the office of queen as well, with the privilege, it tells us, of taking to herself a male consort. Guess who's going to get that job?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's quite obvious from this point that she's obviously of a lineage that comes from the white interloper sort of thing.
Yes, yeah, is that sort of sense a little bit, isn't it? Of they're black people, but they're partly white as well, so that kind of makes it okay-ish.
Mm.
So again, we'll talk about that at the end because there's some particular points I wanted to raise on that, especially with regarding the law in the US at the time. But we'll get to that.
Yeah.
So it's basically taken in by these people, and the only sort of sour note is from this guy called Magawi, who's a muscular brute over 6 feet in height and broad without being stout. And he's the priest, and he thought he was going to be lined up to be consort, so his nose has been put out of joint.
Yeah, and you get this impression of that right away, don't you? Because she's every time she talks, this guy's sort of shooting him. If looks could kill, it's that, isn't it? He's sort of, you see it in films all the time. He wouldn't say anything; he'd just be standing in the corner glowering.
Malignant, the most malignant expression he describes it as.
That's it.
And yeah, whenever Mabaloe smiled upon me, his look became a demoniacal glare. There's quite a few times in this where he describes him as demonic or even Satan possessed, I think, at one point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even calls him a Satan. Yeah.
Mm.
He does actually use the phrase Satan.
Well, given that we're in this unchristian, pre-Christian sort of setting, we're talking about Roman gods or African gods. It doesn't really seem to fit. But I guess that's his European point of view, his sensibilities coming out, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
And then it's time for the buffet and a big booze up. It's party time. And this is where we now get Clark Ashton Smith unleashed to an extent.
Yes, it is, isn't it?
Yes, with this marvellous description. We've had the sort of banquet and the drinking, and now we move to the temple, which is a huge cave illumined by many torches, and now the party really starts.
Yeah, it really does, doesn't it?
It's kind of a classic setting, isn't it? It reminds you of She or any of those type of things.
Yes.
Where we've got Mabaloe sat statuesque and immobile as the goddess herself. Fragrant leaves and grasses were burning on a low altar. Tom-toms were throbbing with delirious insistence, regular as the beating of turgid pulses. That's marvellous, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
And basically everyone strips off and gets down to it, I think.
Pretty much, yeah. It sounds like a right old rave up, doesn't it? Yeah.
But this is a ritual, right? Because all were chanting a solemn, monotonous litany.
Yeah.
So there is a purpose to this. It does form part of some ritual or worship.
Yeah, and it's sort of this point where you get that whole thing of fertility. It's a fertility rite, isn't it? That's how it comes to me. Because he mentions elsewhere the word which I nearly included in my favourite words, fecundation.
Oh.
Which is fertility, to fertilize. So, yeah.
And despite all his stiff upper lipidness and all the rest of it,
stiff upper everything at the minute.
Stiff upper everything, yeah. It's spreading. A bizarre excitement began to invade me, and something of the sacred fervour felt by the devotees found its way into my own blood. And I love this. I felt the resurgence of atavistic impulses, of barbaric passions and superstitions latent in subterranean depths of being. So again, this is that, well, European or American idea of everything is repressed and shut down, particularly in that Victorian, post-Victorian era.
Very much so. Everything was all buttoned up and lights off, socks on, wasn't it? So.
Yeah. But then we get that aspect again. I knew the promptings of a savage hysteria of a lust both animal and religious. So again, it sort of goes back. There is a spiritual aspect to this, if we can put it like that, or a ritualistic or religious aspect. It's not purely lust.
Yeah, it's got this through the flesh of Maboli. I can't pronounce it. I touched the primal reality of the physical world. So it's a good line, isn't it?
And yes, the ceremonies take on a new excitation. Oh, he is summoned to Maboli, and it becomes clear that she wants him to become the consort. He's sort of throned next to her.
Yeah.
And then things really get going. Things were done at which Tiberius would have blushed. Tiberius, we know of as the... I always think a Caligula, I would have thought, would have been a fit there as well.
Yeah.
And then we get this nice one. Elephantis itself could have learned more than one secret from these savages. Well, let's ignore the word savages for the moment, because that's another issue. But Elephantis was a Greek poet and physician, 1st century BC. Interestingly enough, about the same time that the Venus de Medici would have been made. Elephantis was very famous for writing a sex manual, which at the time was a total outrage, apparently, and became quite infamous. It sounds like a sort of version of the Kama Sutra. There's some speculation about the number, but it's thought it showed things like 9 different sexual positions. Which, I mean, there's 9.
9. An early version of the Nookinomicon.
A progenitor.
Yeah, progenitor of the Nookinomicon.
And, well, I think we can draw a veil over what happens next. Smith kind of does. He puts this quite nicely, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Unnoticed by anyone, we left the orgies and came forth upon the open jungle, where warm gusts of perfume wandered beneath the tropical stars. ... And this is the start of Marsden's new life, really.
Yep.
This seems to wake him up, this experience. It seems to bring him to life, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. It's almost like he finds a renewed vigour kind of thing, you know.
It's like it brings him to the full capacity of his being. He knows the mystic impact of perfume and colour and savour and tactile sensation.
Yeah.
So it's like he's really come alive in this environment. Now, we do get a mention of sorcery here. We said earlier there's no real supernatural in this, but he does say at this point, because he finds this isn't just physical attraction, it seems to go beyond that.
Yeah.
With a delightful suggestion of the elder pagan world, a hint of the classic woman and the goddess of old myths. And then he actually says her sorcery perhaps was not really complex, but its power was complete.
Yeah.
So there's a sort of hint of this is more than just a normal attraction.
Yeah.
Is she channeling Venus in some way? Or?
That's kind of how I see it, how I've interpreted it. Obviously through her looks and everything else, I see she's basically the reincarnation of Venus. That's how it reads to me anyway.
And everything is going swimmingly, but we still have this cloud floating around of the jealous Mergawe, the high priest of One Earth.
Yeah.
He's still glowering with a lethal malignity. And then we get that phrase against sullen as a Negro Satan, which is quite an odd
yeah.
one.
I like this one here. He was reputed to be a master of what is known as bad fetish. That is to say, he could lay an evil spell on the person of all possessions of whosoever had incurred his enmity. Enmity. Yeah. The bad fetish, that'd be a great name for a punk band or something, wouldn't it?
Or a club night.
Or a club night, yeah.
Bad fetish.
Yeah.
And we get the first hint here of poison as well. Because he said to know the secret of a terrible slow poison which causes his victims to wither up and shrivel to the stature of a newborn child with prolonged and hellish agonies. Well, we've already seen this happen, so again, there's no surprise at what's going to happen here. So he's spending time here. He sort of loses all track of days and weeks. and everything else is just in this, I suppose, in this state of bliss.
Yeah, it is a sort of euphoric state he's in, isn't it? It's everything is, everything's fluffy and rainbows and unicorns sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it is quite literally. Deep blue heavens and the flowering forest and grassy meadows by the riverside. It's idyllic.
Yeah.
And he talks about this grotto they go to as well, behind the cave temple, that's got a great pool in its centre. And it's all very lovely, apart from the crocodiles in the water.
Yeah.
So again, you think...
A whole bunch of them.
Okay, this is Chekhov's crocodile, isn't it, this one?
Yeah.
So they're going to be popping up again later on.
Mm.
And indeed they are, because Mabole is away on some unknown task or mission, and our man gets a message that she wants to meet him at the grotto, which he thinks is a little bit odd. And he goes to the grotto and he's sort of hanging around looking for her.
Yeah.
And he gets shoved into the pool. A violent push from behind, which sends him with headlong suddenness into the black pool 7 or 8 feet below. He doesn't really know what's going on, but he surfaces and strikes out for the shore, then remembers the crocodiles.
Yeah.
And this was a nice phrase. Turning my head, I saw 2 of the great saurians, whose eyes burned with unholy phosphorescence in the moonlight as they glided towards me. That's very vivid, isn't it?
Yeah. I love the bit just before it. Behind me, I heard a furtive rippling. Now, you see, that's a phrase I use furtive a lot. Furtive rustles, furtive rustling in the undergrowth. It's just says it all, doesn't it?
And now we get, this for me was almost straight out of Tarzan, this next scene.
Yeah.
Because the crocodiles are almost upon him, is helpless, but Mibaloe turns up to save the day, and she dives in with a glittering knife and kills not 1 but 2 crocodiles. What a girl!
Yeah. I love that. The fact that she does. Yeah, she drove the knight to its hilt in the side of the foremost crocodile, and then its companion came on without pausing and met the same unerring thrust of her knife. Great. It's like she just takes him out.
So this is kind of nice reversal of what we generally get in these stories with the helpless female and the male rescue. There's a nice inversion there, isn't there?
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
And of course she says, well, no, I didn't send you a messenger. So obviously it's not difficult to work out who's responsible for this, and they quickly come to the conclusion that Mugabe was behind it.
Yeah, but he's done a runner, hasn't he? He's had it away on his toes. Basically says the sorcerer had disappeared and no one could tell his whereabouts, though more than one person had seen him earlier in the evening. He did not return to his dwelling on the morrow, and though a sedulous and thorough quest was instituted throughout the whole of Azombeii, no trace of him could be found. Yeah, just completely legged it.
Yep. So they sort of think that's the end of it and life settles back down to normal.
Yeah.
Until we get this banquet that's held in Marsden's honour. And during the course of this banquet, Mibaloe is not yet arrived. As we sat awaiting her, a man entered bearing a large calabash full of palm wine. The man was a stranger to me, though he was evidently known to some of the people present. And his name is Malvaisi. And Malvaisi gives him this story about he's been sent by the people of an outland community with a gift of palm wine, which they hope he would accept. And of course, he thanks him. And the guy says, oh, won't you taste it now? Which straight away should flag up something, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But perhaps he's so lost in this bliss, he
Yeah.
doesn't want to think bad of people, or I don't know. Maybe it's that thing when you're happy, everyone else is. Okay.
Yeah.
So he pours out some of the wine and drinks it very slowly, and it's sweet and heavy, but it's got a bit of a bitter taste to it as well. Puckerish bitterness, which is always a sign that there's poison.
Yes, one step from bitter almonds, isn't it?
Yes. And this is where Mibaloe returns, and she snatches the cup out of his hands and says, oh, you've drunk it. And this sort of say, yes, he doesn't know what's going on. The look she turned upon me was indescribable and full of conflicting elements. Horror, agony, devotion, love and fury were mingled in with it, but not towards him. She points to Malvaisi and bade the priests of Wanaos to seize and bind him. And then, without saying anything else, she pours out a cupful of wine and drinks it herself in a single draught.
Yeah.
She knows what this is. She knows that he's doomed.
Yeah.
But if he's doomed, then she doesn't want to live without him, so she's doomed herself as well.
Now we will both die, she said when she had emptied the cup. Fatalism. Yeah.
Yes, quite a thing, really.
Mm.
And Marvesi, well, it's not looking good for him because everyone now knows what's happened.
It's not, is it?
So their anger turns on him. But she wants to find out what's happened and where he got the poison from. And of course, he just grasses on Magawe straight away. It was him. There he is.
Yeah.
That's where he is now.
Living in a secret cavern known only to himself and a few adherents.
So they go off and get him. And even though he struggles with demoniacal strength and fury, there's that idea again.
Mm.
They bore him down and bound him with thongs of rhinoceros hide. That was a nice little touch.
Nice. Yeah.
And he doesn't care. He's been caught. He doesn't care, really. It's kind of he's won, right?
Mm.
The white man's dead. The queen is going to die. That's it. He's won.
I like the fact that as punishment, they force his teeth apart with their spear blades and then pour the wine down his throat.
Yes, they do him to him and the other guy as well. They're both made to drink the poison.
Yep.
And are locked up to die, basically, which is going to, as we know, take some time and be very, very unpleasant.
But that doesn't happen. Because...
No, they get an easy way out in a way.
They do. Yeah, because the villagers, sort of enraged by this, take them out of the cages and feed them to the crocs.
Yeah, which is a not pleasant way to go, but far more pleasant than what was in store for them, I guess.
Slow, lingering death, yeah.
And this, of course, it's a British understatement, puts a bit of a dampener on things.
Yeah.
This previously blissful state has just gone. Now it's there's no joy or happiness. The blackness of the doom that's come to us, like the charnel shadow cast by the gathering of a myriad vultures. Again, not a Smith story if we haven't got charnel in there, is it?
No, definitely.
Charnel shadow cast by vultures. That's lovely.
Love it. Yeah.
So they agree that he's going to leave Azombeii and return to his native land, and she'll stay there, and that's it. They'll never see each other again. They're both going to die in their own way, separately. Very sad parting. And she gives him the keepsake, which is the statuette that we opened the story with, to take with him. So that's basically it. He returns to America, and then in this journal that the protagonist is reading, he explains how he feels the first workings of the poison.
Yeah.
I've recognised all its preliminary symptoms, and the sickening expectations of haunted days and sleep-forbidden nights are being realised. So he knows what's coming, and I suppose what makes it even worse is he knows that that's what Mibaloe is going to be going through as well.
It's not a nice way to go, is it?
No.
Yeah.
No.
And then it just ends on such a wonderful line, which is what we just touched on. I have begun to envy the death of Marvesi and Magawe in the pool of crocodiles.
Yes. So that's it. I suppose again with Smith, there's that idea of finding your true love, your spiritual and physical companion, and then that's gone, which we've seen so many times before, or even now in the relatively few stories we've covered.
Yeah, it is a recurring theme, isn't it? That thing of finding your soulmate, for want of a better term, and then having it snatched away from you, kind of thing. Yeah, it's an interesting story because it is more. It's like a Shakespearean tragedy almost. Oh, it is kind of like a Romeo and Juliet kind of deal, isn't it?
Othello kind of thing.
Othello, yeah.
Again, a common theme there, isn't it? Of murder and poison being seems to be one of the most common uses of getting, or the most common ways of getting rid of someone in this type of story.
Yeah, which is interesting because obviously the Medicis were known for poison as well. So yeah.
What was that saying? You can say you're going to dine with the Medicis, but you can never say you dined at the Medicis.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, you must pop round.
Yeah. Who's got the Borgias in there? It'd have got the whole hog, wouldn't it?
So yeah, it's for Smith quite a happy story that ends very sadly, and I think there's a couple of hints of supernatural in there. We've mentioned the sorcery before, but also I think when the priest describes about he's making the poison, there's something about a chant he's doing or a litany is saying. So again, there's a hint maybe of something supernatural, but nothing really overt. Was he pitching this for a particular audience again? Do you think there's a lot less of the fantastic in this than his other stories?
Yeah, I think again, this was still that sort of in that stage of his career where I think he was still smarting over how many stories had been rejected by Wright. It does seem, because I mean, as well, it may have been to branch out into outstanding stories and the various adventure pulps, that Howard was in a lot of, and so maybe it was an attempt at that market. Maybe,
yeah.
I'm pretty sure there was a pulp like pretty much dedicated to sort of your Edgar Rice Burroughs style African adventure stories. I'm pretty sure there was.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure there was. Yeah. And that would have been a very common sort of trope of the time, I think, along with the idea of ancient Egypt and mummies and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
We're sort of, I guess we're past the heyday of the Victorian explorer, but there was still a lot that hadn't been explored.
Oh, yeah, the 20s, there was still a lot of them. But that's when you got less of the explorer and more of the actual archaeologist and anthropologist.
Yes, that's very true, isn't it? Yeah, because wasn't that when Troy was discovered, I think, in the 20s? And that sort of thing.
Yeah, and obviously you had Carter in Egypt and all that kind of job there.
So overall, it's, again, I don't think it's one of Smith's best, but as we always say, even Smith not at his best is still head and shoulders above most of the pulp stuff from that era.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, just in the way it's written. Because, I mean, that's the sort of story that doesn't really do a lot for me, that kind of tragic love story. I mean, it's not really what I read, but because in the way he's written it, it still has that sort of dark, sinister undercurrent, which does appeal to me. So, I think that's a testament to his writing, really, to his skill.
Yes, yeah. And again, some lovely phrases and lines and use of language in there as well, as we come to expect. So let's talk a little bit then about this idea of Africa as he sees it, or I guess the way he sees it was as it was commonly seen in those days, as we've already discussed. Yeah. And I certainly think in that sense we can say Smith was broadly in line with the times. I think we know if we talk about Lovecraft, he was way beyond his times for racism, even in those times.
Yes.
Though his attitude may have changed slightly towards the end of his life. Perhaps there's debate about that. But Smith doesn't seem to have quite that same sort of, hatred, really. I mean, with Lovecraft, it was a real hatred, isn't it?
I think it's more of the sort of the curiosity with Smith, that it's exotic and different, which is a case of a lot of. I guess it's more. He's got more of the sensibilities of that kind of dilettante explorer. Whereas, Lovecraft had more of the
fear. Really, it wasn't fear of the other.
Yeah, it was fear. It's precisely what it was. It was xenophobia. That's pure and simple. He was afraid of the unknown. I
think with him, it was the worst of everything. You had that xenophobia. You had the snobbery element with the outlook of the being British in inverted commas.
Yeah,
but then you had that actual racism as well. Of people being inferior or superior.
Yes.
Smith, I think we tend not to get so much of that. And I mean, one thing with this story, for all that there are some problematic areas with it, perhaps, certainly from a modern perspective, at the end of it, we've got a kind of mixed race relationship going on.
Yeah.
And some people speculate that's one reason why this story was never particularly widely published. Later on, because that
would make sense.
I mean, if we think back to Star Trek, 67, 68, the first multiracial screen kiss, which caused a lot of upset at the time.
Yep.
And in fact, miscegenation, or like marriage between, I don't even like using the words marriage between races because,
No, I don't. It's.
That's the kind of terminology that we're sort of stuck with at the moment.
Mm.
So people weren't allowed to marry miscegenation was an offence. The last state to repeal that was Maryland in 1967.
Bloody hell, that recent. That's terrifying.
You think that's bad?
Yeah.
It stayed on the statute books or on the constitutions of a lot of states. The last one to remove it officially from its constitution was Alabama in 2000.
What?
Right?
2000?
Yep.
Christ.
There was a vote. 500,000 people, 40% of those who voted, wanted to keep that on the statute books.
Oh, you have got to be kidding me.
So, I mean, when we talk about, this was all of its time and everything else, people should let it go now. Why do you keep bringing that up? Well, because it's still there. I mean, you know.
Just because people haven't been talking about it doesn't mean it isn't there. That's madness.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think in that light, you know, Smith, you don't give these people marks out of 10, do you? You know what I mean?
No.
There are elements, but I think it's a lot less.
Yeah, I don't see it as the portrayal. Personally, it's just the language used.
Yeah.
It obviously it's the phraseology of the time was very questionable. Like you touched on it, savages, things like that, natives, savages, that kind of thing, right? But their actual portrayal of these people, his actual portrayal of these people is positive.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, even the guys that have been helping him at the beginning, these the bearer chaps, he's got nothing but good things to say about them.
Yeah.
Even when they bugger off and leave him, he's still like, yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And I know, like, sort of Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard obviously had extensive correspondence, and they talked a lot about, one of Howard's big themes of civilization versus barbarism. So there's a lot of back and forward between them on that and their various views and perspectives on it. I've not found that same thing with Smith reading through the letters here.
No.
It seems that they largely talk about their work, complain about editors, and
that's just
discuss
Smith.
Things like Poe and everything.
That's just Smith, because that's exactly what he does with Derleth. They basically spend all the time bitching and moaning about editors.
Although it has been noted that some of those editors were Jewish, and there is some questionable terminology used in there.
Yeah.
Some people have, I suppose, excused that by saying, well, it's kind of jokey and whatever. But again, that's an area that's a little bit kind of cringy when you read it today.
Yeah, definitely.
The other thing is, Smith does have quite a lot of non-white heroes or protagonists in his stories as well. I can't think of a single Lovecraft protagonist who isn't white, scholarly, middle class.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, if you boil it down, all of Lovecraft's protagonists are him. All of them. Yeah, all of them.
It is really, isn't it?
Yeah. There's no women. Never mind other races. It's all just, you know.
Well, yeah. And typically the villains are all foreign types, or, you know, not quite the same as us.
Yeah. Or the Irish.
Yes, well, though, I think Haunter of the Dark, the Italians kind of help him, don't they,
yeah.
really?
Yeah, they do, really.
But there's still that sort of looking down on them, isn't there? They're not quite the same as us, are they? You know?
Yeah. It's that very Victorian outlook, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know.
And I suppose maybe that partly becomes because we know Lovecraft wasn't at all concerned about character.
No.
So why even bother investing any of these people with any sort of character or filling them out beyond a stereotype?
Yeah, it makes sense. If it works, it works, doesn't it? You know.
Yeah.
Depends what you're going for, really.
I did think that was interesting as well, just going back to the Sex Grotto scene.
Sex Grotto.
Which, Sex Grotto is another good name for a nightclub.
Isn't it?
Episode where they meet the swingers and it's like, oh, Lynn, they're sex people.
Oh, yeah.
And I think the phrasing is something like they're doing things that are way beyond what civilized people do. Well, you can't tell me there weren't swingers around in Victorian England and all sorts of stuff going on.
Well, it was like the height of hanky spanky, wasn't it, really? There was a lot of, you know.
Yeah, all sorts of houses of ill repute.
Yeah, BDSM was pretty much a big thing back then. You know, the old spanked bottoms and all that business, you know.
So it is interesting how in those times all that was covered up and repressed, and now it's not happening. But
Yeah.
you point to somewhere like Africa, oh, they're all libidinous, lust-driven.
Yeah.
It's people are the same the world over, really.
Well, exactly. I mean, you only had to look at like how many prostitutes there were in the East End of London. You know.
Yeah. It was.
There's obviously got to be a market for it if there's that many.
Yeah,
of them.
I can't remember the figure now, but it was something horrendous.
It's ridiculous. Yeah.
And you know, 14, and I mean, just awful.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So there we go. So that's the Venus of Azombeii. It's nice to get into some longer stories, and even if it's, say, not quite Smith at his best, but still interesting. Now, next time, I think we're really stepping up a couple of gears, aren't we?
Oh, yes. I am really looking forward to the next one. It's one of my favourites, not just of Smith, but of any sort of Cthulhu mythos stuff. It's because it introduces my you know, if I was a cultist, the one I would worship. So, yeah, the old sleepy toad god himself.
Yes. Sarthogio is going to make an appearance. Yeah. Because we're going to be looking at the Tale of Setamprazeros. I think it's high up on the list of everyone's favourite weird fiction or sword and sorcery kind of tale, isn't it?
Yes.
It really fits into that. And here we can see the beginnings of things like Farford and the Grey Mouse. Jack Vance, all those kind of stories.
Yeah.
And furthermore, we've got another guest, our second guest, coming in to chat with us about it. And that's Mr. Gavin Chappell, who's the editor of Lovecraftiana magazine, author, and various other endeavours as well. So we'll have a chat with Gavin about what he's doing, and then we're going to have a look through Setamprazeros.
Yeah, excellent.
Yes, hope you can join us for that, folks.
Brilliant.
I just want to say a thank you, as always, to our patrons, especially our new patrons, Brett Kramer, Aaron Vleck, and Steve Meyer. Thanks very much for joining.
Thanks, guys.
If you look at our Patreon site, you can see how you can sign up and subscribe to the show. Remember, not only do you get the bonus content for Strange Shadows, you also get bonus episodes for the Innsmouth Book Club. And in fact, we've got a new little bonus item coming up soon, I believe. As we were covering
Thomas Ligotti's Last Feast of Harlequin in the Innsmouth Book Club, I thought it'd be nice because one of the things touched on in that a lot is Edgar Allan Poe's The Conqueror Worm. So I've done a little reading of that poem.
Excellent. We're going to get that up on our YouTube channel. We'll put some sort of video to it and everything else. It's a great reading, so nice. That'd be great. Oh, and speaking of YouTube, also thanks to our new YouTube subscribers. So we've had quite a lot of people sign up to the Innsmouth Book Club YouTube as well.
Oh, excellent.
So that's it for now. If you have any comments or suggestions or questions or anything you'd like to chat to us about, we have been getting some messages coming in. Perhaps we'll read some of those next time. Do keep those coming in. It's always great to hear from you. And with that, it's goodbye from me, Rob Hoyton.
And it's goodbye from me, Tim Mendes.
You have been listening to Strange Shadows, an Innsmouth Book Club production in association with Innsmouth Gold. For more information, visit innsmouthgold.com.